All right, so in the last segment, we talked about monopoly. And at the end of that, we talked about how a monopoly is really can be thought of as a form of a market failure. But if you allow a monopoly to operate as a profit maximizer, the outcome is not socially optimal. Instead, there's a deadweight loss to society because the monopolist restricts output and charges a higher price than would be socially optimal. And so allowing firms to simply operate as monopolies is maybe not great public policy because it doesn't serve society particularly well. Natural monopolies are a different story, and that's what we're going to talk about in this segment. A natural monopoly is, we can think about it intuitively, we can think about it in the way that economists like to define it. So a natural monopoly is a situation where we think it makes sense from a societal standpoint to just have one firm in an industry. If you get your water, if you buy water from from public utility, you know that there's only one choice typically, right? There's going to be one public water supplier, and you either buy water from them or you don't have any water. Why is it limited? Because they've been allowed to be the only supplier. Why would we want that? Well, imagine we had 5 suppliers of water, each with its own set of pipes running under our streets and yards. It would just be a mess. It would be very confusing, very expensive to maintain. It makes more sense just to allow one supplier to have all the pipes. Or if you buy electricity from an electric company, typically you don't have a lot of choices there. Why not have 5 or 6 electric suppliers? Well, they're all going to be stringing their own wires along the street. And that's unsightly. It's probably not particularly safe. If you drive a car and there are more poles on the side of the street you could run your car into, that's not good. And so sort of intuitively, it makes sense in some cases for there just to be one supplier of a good. Economically, we make the case a little bit differently. Economically, what we say is this, that if you're, think about electrical supply, if you're going to supply electricity to an area, you're going to have to spend a lot of money to create an electrical generating facility. Just building the facility itself, whether it's nuclear or conventional, however you're going to power it, building that is going to cost you probably billions of dollars. Very, very expensive to get built. And that's before you ever sell a unit. Okay, just to sell your first watt of power, you're going to have to spend billions of dollars. So there's a big initial cost. And once you've got that initial cost taken care of, then what do? Well, then you start looking for customers. And in order to add customers, all you need to do is string up wire and connect the wire to the customers' houses. Okay, and that doesn't cost nothing. It's not free, but it's much cheaper than building the facility. So let's take a look at how we can think about monopoly or natural monopoly in a way that's consistent with the way economists frame things. So, natural monopoly. And what we'll say about natural monopoly is that there's societal reasons to allow only one firm in the industry. You can tell this is quite different from what we talked about before. We said before that monopoly is a bad thing for society. In the case of natural monopoly, we make the case that that natural monopoly is a good thing for society, just having that one firm. And from an economist viewpoint, the main characteristics are high initial cost, a high startup cost, and very low marginal cost. So let's see what that looks like graphically. The dollars and output. I'm going to have a demand curve, marginal revenue. And now, let's see, I'm going to have an average cost that declines over a huge range of outputs. There's my average total cost. I know that marginal cost will hit it at its minimum, and so marginal cost is also very low. And we get a situation that looks maybe like that. So here's a monopoly, and we could first ask, well, if we simply allow this firm to be a monopoly and let it operate as it would prefer, what will it do? Well, what we'd expect is that the firm will set marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. It will produce this quantity, call that the monopoly output, and it will sell at this price. And this firm will be quite profitable. This entire area here will be, this rectangle will be the firm's economic profit. And as a society, what we'll see also is that there's a deadweight loss, right? The deadweight loss is the area under the demand curve above marginal cost. And so that's going to be this entire area. Huge deadweight loss. If this were a competitive firm, we'd expect the firm to be operating over here, much higher output, much lower price. So the question is, how do we regulate this firm? If we're going to allow it to exist, we don't want to allow it to exist and provide a small level of output at very high prices, taking advantage of the public that gives it permission to exist. Instead, what we're going to do is to regulate the way that it operates. So what are our choices for regulation? Well, the first choice would be this, to say, why don't we regulate this firm in a way that sort of mimics what a competitive market would look like. And that means we'll set marginal cost equal to the demand curve. Why? Because marginal cost, remember, is our stand-in for a supply curve. And we know that if this were a competitive market, equilibrium price and quantity would be set right here. And so let's call this the marginal cost quantity, because we're setting marginal cost equal to demand. And there's the marginal cost price. Okay, so this point is what we would call marginal cost pricing. Marginal cost pricing, then, is when we set marginal cost equal to the demand curve and use the resulting price and quantity to guide us. All right, so we go to the firm, we go to the electric company, and we say that this is the price you're going to be allowed to charge, and we expect that at that price you'll provide a quantity like this quantity, much greater than what you were intending to do. And the electric company is not at all happy. Why? Because what we're doing is we're forcing them to operate at a price that is below their average total cost. What does that mean? If we make them operate here, we're going to be making them operate at a loss. They're going to be losing money consistently. So we can regulate them. We can tell them they're the only monopolist that's allowed, or the only firm that's allowed to sell electricity in this market, but we can't force them to stay in business losing money. That's just an impractical sort of regulation. It's not going to work. So what we need to do is to find some middle ground. And the middle ground is going to be this. Let's set the quantity here and the price here. And we'll call that average cost pricing. So with average cost pricing, we set average total cost equal to the demand. And that means that total cost will equal, well, let's see. Total cost is going to be average total cost at this quantity times that quantity. The total revenue is going to be this price times that quantity. And so total cost equals total revenue, which means that the economic profit equals 0. So our idea then is to regulate the firm in a way that sets economic profit equal to 0. And we do that by setting average total cost equal to demand. Are there going to be difficulties with this? There sure are. One difficulty is the following, and if you have paid attention to local news in the US at all, you've heard of examples of companies that are regulated, power companies in particular, that are always negotiating with the local, usually with the state, over what prices they can charge for their power. Now our picture, what we've just drawn, our picture makes it seem like if you're going to regulate a firm in this way, it would be quite straightforward to figure out what the appropriate price is. But one thing to remember is that this average total cost curve, that average total cost curve, I'm just going to move up here, encompasses all explicit and implicit costs. Okay, so the explicit costs are the things that your accountant sees. They're the things for which you have to write checks, for which you have to pay your suppliers. But the implicit costs aren't so visible. And so what happens is when you say to the firm, we're going to set your price equal to your average total cost, you now end up arguing with the firm over what their average total cost is, because the firm has to value its implicit costs. It has to value the opportunity cost, how much has to be paid to the owners of the firm, whether they're shareholders or whomever owns the firm. And so this turns out to be messier than our picture would imply. It's an interesting area, regulation of industries is a very interesting area. And this just really kind of scratches the surface on how to think about it, but it does bring out the idea that natural monopolies make societal sense, but they're very difficult to regulate in a way that is not controversial.